two of the most widely spoken languages on the planet, Spanish and Portuguese. And Maharaj is fluent in both those languages. Prabhupada always encouraged Hridayananda Maharaj to also do college preaching, which he's always done and continues to do all over the world, actually, not only in North America. And he has a degree from his books are actually outside. If anyone would like to purchase one of Maharaj's books, they're available outside. And Maharaj, I'm sure I can speak for all the devotees. We're very grateful to you and the late, mine away here. I'm getting Govardhana obviously over here. The late Govardhana Prabhu for, I'm still in the way. Hare Krishna. For wonderfully completing the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, and the entire 11 and 12 cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The first 9 Westerners had ever done this translation work, everyone, so I'm very, very grateful to you for doing that. Thank you so much. We're going to give Hridayananda Maharaj all the time in the world, almost this afternoon, at least until 6 o'clock.
Or until you can't stand it anymore.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Maharaj. I think we'll keep you here. We'll kidnap you, keep you here at Govardhana. But yes, and of course the feast will be served at 6 and the kirtan later on this evening. But now, Maharaj, thank you again for coming. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. I feel myself very fortunate to be here. Such a beautiful country, so many good people, good devotees. So I would like to read 2 verses from the Bhagavad Gita, which I think of as the sort of the existentialist verses of the Gita. Existentialism, just to explain, is a name that was given to a philosophical tradition that it's traced to Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, and, Jean-Paul Sartre. The idea is, well, first I'll explain a little bit popular in the 60s. Now people don't pay so much attention to it, but Kierkegaard, I believe in the 1800s, he was observing the Industrial Revolution and mass production. And of course, this was in a world in which everything used to be made by hand, and people lived in villages, and so he thought that people were kind of losing their souls, losing their individuality, losing their dignity. Everything was becoming mass culture. And so existentialism is the idea that we have to take responsibility for our own lives, that we can't just merge into some group identity. I mean, obviously we should belong to groups, the right groups, and we cooperate, we participate, but that ultimately we should never give up our personal responsibility for our life and our own conscience. And then I'll skip Nietzsche. Anyway. So we look at Jean-Paul Sartre. His experience was during World War II when the Nazis occupied France. He felt that you want some water? Okay. I have a throat lozenge also if you want one.
I'm just rising it slow.
Since you're a devotee, I'll give you a discount. So, Sartre believed that there were French people, his fellow citizens, who were cooperating with the Nazis beyond what was necessary, just like not to get in trouble. Obviously, if your life is at stake or your family's lives are at stake, then you may cooperate to save yourself or to save your family. That's kind of a human response. He thought people were going beyond that. They were kind of giving up responsibility for their lives. And also, interestingly, and this is another very important point, he blamed this, or a part of the blame at least, he felt was this growing psychological determinism in Europe. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Determinism means that given the way things are, something has to happen. For example, let's say here's a bottle of water. So if I take the cap off and turn it over, and you realize, oh my God, dementia. But anyway, if I take the cap off, I mean, let's say if I point into the cup, then the water has to go out. The water can't say, what am I doing in this bottle? Why am I flowing into a cup? What am I doing with my life? I think I'm going to do something else. I mean, the water is not conscious, has no free will. So the water has to go. It's determined. It's determined by the circumstances that something must happen. Namely, the water must flow into the cup. So that's a deterministic model. And with the rise of science in the West, and people discovered more and more necessary causal relationships. Like, for example, with Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. You know, why do the planets orbit? Why is there a law of gravity like Earth? There's more and more, how should I put it? Before Newton, to put it very simply, people in Europe lived in Middle Earth. I mean, there were fairies in the air, there were, trolls under bridges, where they thought they were. And then with Newton and the whole age of science, people start to see that there are good reasons for things or explanations, that the more we discover the laws of science, the more we understand these necessary relationships. And as you master necessary relationships, obviously you can have an industrial revolution. Because you can create machines that will necessarily mass produce all kinds of products. So you can see this is really what happened to the world. So we're living in a world which fell into science and mass production. Now, this doesn't mean there's no God necessarily, although some foolish people took it that way. For example, Newton himself thought that he was glorifying God, showing the existence of God, because the more we show the universe is rational, the more there must be an intelligent mind behind it. And this was a very old idea. This idea is many thousands of years old. For example, around the time of Jesus and before that, there was a group called the Stoics and other groups who had this very interesting philosophy. And that is, they said that God is ultimately a supremely rational creature. Not the kind of God we get from some religions who needs a whole list of 12-step programs. Like anger management, jealousy management, cruelty management. But this is pre-Christian idea. So that God is an infinitely rational creature. And this divine reason, this ability to just get things right and to see things clearly, they called this divine reason the logos. The logos. That's why, for example, the word logos was put at the end of every science, like geology, biology, and everything. It's funny, the one the scientists lost, and they're really unhappy about this, they lost the astrology thing. The bad guys got theology, and they were stuck with astronomy. But anyway, so the idea is that when God creates the world, he creates the world in a completely rational way. There's a good reason for everything in the world. And in that sense, the world is teleological. The Greek word telos means purpose. The world has a purpose, not merely a purpose you give to yourself. For example, you can say that today I'm going to, walk in the woods. So you create a purpose for yourself. If you decide that, well, actually I'm not going to go for a walk in the woods, then it's no longer your purpose. So it's not an objective purpose, it's a subjective purpose. It's simply something you decide to do. Teleology means that even if you're unaware of it, even if you don't accept it, you have an objective purpose in life. For example, Krishna consciousness is very teleological. We say human life is meant for developing spiritual understanding. And so no matter how many people say, I don't want that purpose in my life, I'm not going to do it, it's still your real purpose. You just don't know it. It's just like parents can say to your children, your purpose is really to become a civilized human being, stop going to jail, give up your drug addiction and try to become. And so whether or not the child accepts it, you can say from the point of view of having a good life, that purpose really is a good purpose, whether or not the child accepts it. And you can say it's even an objective purpose in the sense that that's God's purpose for us. Just like every parent wants their children to have a good life, to be happy, to be healthy, stay out of jail. So the Supreme Father, or God, or Supreme Parent, and Mother, Krishna says, I'm also the mother of the universe. Pitahamasya Jagato Mata, the father and the mother. So teleology means that there are objective purposes in the world. So when God creates the world, he has a good reason for everything he does, and therefore his own logos, his own divine reason is invested everywhere in his creation. And that's why everywhere you look in the universe, you find laws. There are laws of nature. There's no place in the universe that we can look where you don't find lawfulness, that everything is happening according to laws. And so that same logos, that same divine reason is also within us, because we are also creatures. We're created by God. And therefore, we do science or we do philosophy. In other words, we're rational when the logos within us connects with the logos in the creation. And ultimately, by connecting to the logos within the mind of God, we develop a powerful relationship with God. And so obviously, this is a very rational form of religion. You can have religious sentiments, you can feel devotion and love, but it is what Prabhupada said, religion and philosophy combined. So this idea that, if you want to know the danger of having religion without philosophy, read the news. It's called terrorism and a lot of other nonsense things. If you have reason without philosophy, or if you have science without religion, look at Nazi Germany. Very science-centric, really into science. By the way, you may know or not know that one of the biggest fans of Darwin, one of Darwin's biggest fans was Hitler. Hitler thought he was carrying out a Darwinian project, survival of the fittest. The fittest are the sort of, the big, blonde, Teutonic, Germanic people. And therefore, let's kill the Jews and the Gypsies and basically anyone that just doesn't look like they should live. And survival of the fittest. And if we're able to kill them, genocide is natural. It's part of nature. It's like, for example, let's say there's a bird population somewhere in a forest, and then another bird is introduced or comes there, and those birds eliminate the original bird population. Genocide happens all the time in nature. So if you just want to be natural, watch out. If you just want to be ecological, watch out, because if you're not into spiritual values, you just want to be environmental, then the best thing we could do for this planet right now is probably kill about, maybe 5 billion people. It depends on, how pure you are in your environmental concepts. If you want like a really natural planet, maybe let's bump it up to 6 billion. Another thing you should keep in mind is that if you read history and all the atrocities of history, just like horrific, this mind-numbing evil that was done in history, it was all done in a completely ecological planet. This is all pre-industrial. The rivers were clean, the air was pure, all the food was organic, and people were slaughtering each other. So the idea that that's enough, to have an ecological planet, it's necessary but not sufficient. It's necessary but not sufficient. One little side note here you may find interesting, that several generations after Jesus, there was a member of the Jesus community, which was just coming to be called Christianity. That name was given later. And he wanted to preach to intelligent people. That was the idea. Like, let's preach to intelligent people. And so he wrote a book in which the first sentence of his book, trying to preach to intelligent people, is, in the beginning was the Logos. Of course, it's the book of John, and it's translated the Word. The beginning was the Word. He actually said Logos. And he was trying to like preach to intelligent people through this Logos philosophy. And the Logos became flesh, and it's our guy. So join us. But anyway, so that idea of the Logos, that God is a rational creature, and getting back to the idea of existentialism, if you understand, okay, psychological determinism. Whew, got a few more years and I can still remember the first thing I said in my lecture. Anyway, so I've explained what determinism is. Determinism is, it means you have a certain set of conditions, whether it's, you know, an apple falling from a tree or whatever it is. And given the circumstances, something has to happen. Like if you roll a ball down the hill, it has to roll down the hill, given the circumstances, that the surface is inclined in that way, there's a law of gravity, there's nothing blocking the ball. So that's what determinism is. Given a certain set of circumstances, something has to happen. You can't put a guilt trip in the ball, like, why'd you roll down that hill, man? Sometimes I refer to very basic American English. So one thing is that within a deterministic system, there's no moral responsibility. Let's say I'm walking down the street and someone pushes me and I fall into another person. That person falls and injures themselves. I didn't do anything wrong. I committed no crime. I did nothing immoral because it was totally involuntary. Someone pushed me, and given the laws of nature, once I was pushed, I could not avoid falling forward and bumping a person that fell down and maybe injured themselves. And so when you're forced to do something, you're not morally